as you can see from the slide, in 2020, production was much lower than what was planned because of the COVID-19 epidemic worldwide. All countries have been affected, so which was impacting the production. In Q1 2021, the production of ferrochromium restarted, but still it's a bit slow, and also it's less than what expected in Q4 2020. Also, it is related to other issues. COVID is not behind us. COVID is still there. There has also been these major freight issues. And also there has been in China, the New Year celebration. So all this type of events may have been affecting the production of ferrochromium. And of course, there has been also the energy questions. You all know that now in China, all the environmental legislation are getting tougher and tougher. And that also in Inner Mongolia at the moment, they have been deciding to cut down electricity because the targets set by the local government have not been met. And in China, they're also closing all the smaller furnaces, which are seen to be inefficient. All the furnaces below 25 MVA also are being closed. So this is also leading to less production of ferrochromium in the first quarter of 2021.
So painting the picture a little bit differently in terms of looking at this in a time series, where has the growth been for these different alloys? So on the left, total alloy demands, again, this is now on a contained metal basis, and you can see the proportion that stainless steel has relative to other crude steels. And then the two figures to the right showing you the breakdown for crude and other alloy steels compared to stainless steel in terms of what metals are really consumed in there. So really, manganese and silicon driven by the crude and other alloy steels, whereas stainless steel really underpinning the growth for the chromium and nickel industry. And you can see that over the figures showing in the last decade, but what we've really seen in the last 2 decades was the growth of the Chinese steel industry, which you've been hearing about over the last 2 days of the conference, is really underpinning that growth, and you can see that nicely represented in here in this graph. And add this again, we just heard about green steel or less polluting steel, I think was the comment. And part of this whole narrative is not only sustainability but also criticality. So governments are very much focusing on an inward-looking approach in terms of their raw material sustainability and security. And these green boxes are supposed to be little ticks and are effectively critical raw material CRM studies by different governments and identifying where there is supply risk for raw materials. And the steel alloys that we're talking about in this presentation are really identified across the board. So if you're looking at chromium, okay, the EU and European countries, they have domestic sources, so that's not one of their critical raw material markets. But across the board, chromium is a key market. The same for manganese. Now, for China's last 5-year plan from 2016 to 2020, manganese wasn't as critical, but supply of manganese ore as a raw material has been in decline. So I think we'll be able to see manganese add a tick to that. And the same is true for many of the other alloys. Specifically, not only are the steel alloys part of that decarbonization of the steel industry, but many of these, specific manganese and nickel, taking a headline in the battery raw material markets.
So why are these port stocks so high, and what explains the flatness really of the manganese ore prices, even during a time when the production costs are starting to rise quite substantially? Well, over time, and we'll see this in a minute, over the long term, we do see a very strong correlation between production costs and prices. But in the short term, just as in most markets, the supply-demand situation is a more reliable indicator of how the prices move. This is just looking at the exports of manganese ore from the top 5 exporting countries: South Africa, Australia, Gabon, Ghana, and Brazil. And together, they're roughly 3/4 of manganese production worldwide. And in all those countries, there's very little domestic consumption of the manganese ore. So exports are good proxy for production levels if you add them all together. And you can see that there's a reasonably good match here with the way the price has moved. When supply levels rose in second half 2019, we saw the price drop. When through the early COVID period, first half 2020, we saw supply come down, the price modestly increased. Then as South Africa came back online normally through second half 2020, the price came down again. And what we've seen with the first quarter 2021 data was a little bit of an easing of the supply volumes, as you saw with the stock levels coming down a bit, and so the prices just came back up a little bit. So this matches fairly well.
So China stopping ferrochrome production. So the trends really have been around the growth in China. So if we look at where capacity is currently being developed from the ferrochrome side, it still is in China. The impacts of freight and costs are so fundamentally we have to look at where the competition lies. So what we've been seeing is, the competitive advantage that South Africa used to have as a ferrochrome producer really being eroded over the last couple of decades, with mainly related to the electricity issues in South Africa, but also in general the increase in production costs. So in order for China to really stop producing ferrochrome, that competitive advantage would need to switch back completely. I don't see a scenario where China completely stops production of ferrochrome being the case. Even with the discussion of an export tax from South Africa, I think that's one that will potentially have more of an impact on the developments of ferrochrome capacity. But even so, the cost of ore production out of South Africa is low enough that the competitive advantage in China, with all the other freight costs around it, seems to still remain intact. If we were to take China off the market, hypothetically from a ferrochrome perspective, the majority of the ore is based in South Africa, so we could potentially see something like we've seen in the manganese industry. And Kevin and myself have looked at this in Chromium by looking at, would Malaysia be a potential export hub for ferrochrome, much like we've seen it being developed for ferromanganese and ferrosilicon. We're already seeing Tsingshan with its stainless steel capacity in Indonesia developing ferrochrome capacity as part of its integrated 4-in-1 stainless steel process. But now we're hearing development of actual ferrochrome capacity standalone in Indonesia, together with what we're already seeing in NPI. So I would say that if we take China off the picture, we would see the rest of sort of Southeast Asia be a key target to look at that, because it still gathers the benefits of the South African ore. That doesn't necessarily address the freight rates. You still got to get ship it over there. But South Africa has certain headwinds to actually growing its ferrochrome capacity. The last plant that came online in South Africa was the Lion plant that was built in 2012 and then ramped up later. And right now there's more of a question of keeping the existing plants operational rather than we're not seeing much news about new capacity being developed in South Africa. So I think that's still some way off